Hello everybody and welcome to this GCSE PE bite-sized video. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Carolyn Rivera, who is the Principal Moderator for GCSE PE Component 3 Practical Performance. We'll be discussing the Summer 2023 series and we'll be offering some guidance to support with the assessment and moderation for this component. So welcome, Caroline. And so the first question is, how did the summer series, the 2023 series go? What went well?
Good afternoon, Penny. So most centres are now comfortable and fully conversant with the moderation requirements. And in the main, we're very well organised to ensure a smooth running process. This includes an early return of the initial contact questionnaire, that's the ICQ form, accurate and timely completion of the PE2MS form, and the Edexcel online mark submission, through to showing the skills in isolation at an appropriate level of demand to enable candidates to perform to their maximum level of potential, followed by a realistic competitive situation. It was also noticeable that where centres had held a mock moderation day for their candidates, this enabled them to focus on the quality of their performance rather than have to worry about the setup of the practice. It was also pleasing to see an increasing range of activities being shown this year, which enabled candidates to maximise their potential and access high marks. This included many of the new activities that have been added to the DFE approved list in the specification for the first assessment in 2022, such as figure skating, squash, acrobatic gymnastics, sailing and water polo.
Thank you. That seems like a really successful series. But what advice, what could be improved?
Okay, so there are a couple of issues to consider when candidates are assessed performing in sports and activities that take place outside of school in particular, such as at club, county, academy level, classed as off-site activities. The first is that there is an assumption that if a candidate competes in a sport or physical activity that is taken outside of school, then they are automatically awarded marks from the top of the level bands. It is important to remember that no matter what sport a candidate is assessed in, the mark they are awarded must be based on them meeting the criteria that is published in the Practical Performance Assessment Criteria, or the PAC, and we're currently using version 5, using all or at least most of the performance traits, and not on the level of representation they perform at within their sport. That's including any times or distances that they have achieved. For example, the candidate may be a county footballer or above and perform the physical skills and techniques at a very good level and play with very good position-specific skills during a competitive game. However, they may rarely demonstrate any communication skills during the game, therefore having little impact on the team performance, and their response to tactical changes may be inconsistently applied. It would therefore be inappropriate and inaccurate to award marks from the top level mark band using a best fit approach, which is what we always try to use, to marking, as not all the performance traits listed in the criteria have been achieved at a very good level. The same is also applicable to those who are assessed in an activity where the candidates have had little experience and complete an extended course at an outdoor activity centre, for example. It is very difficult to master the quality of the core skills as well as the advanced skills and techniques to any great degree over a short period of time. That is, as well as being able to demonstrate adequate knowledge and understanding of the sport or physical activity that will enable the candidates to work at their full potential. It is therefore something to be aware of when conducting an assessment following a short-term residential compared with a sustained block of work on an activity. So, in general, protocol was accurately observed, with few centres offering forbidden practical combinations. However, it is becoming more apparent, I suppose as people get more familiar with the specification, that some are not adhering to the requirements of the specification and paying particular attention to it, and are not following the additional guidance that has been published in the non-examined assessment document, or as we call it, the NEA document. Activities that are listed in the specification, currently version 4, and the PAC, currently version 5, are the only activities that can be assessed and are as they appear in the published version of the PAC. The list of activities has been approved by the Department for Education and will not change until the next review of the specification. It is therefore not possible to deviate from the approved list. For example, it's not possible to offer tag rugby as an alternative to a full game of rugby union or league, or five-a-side football as an alternative to a full game of football. The assessment criteria can be adapted for those with disabilities if the criteria is not compromised or changed. And this must also be agreed with the physical education assessment team. And the moderator should be informed if there are any such adaptations or changes to an activity. Also, it's important to remember that meeting local needs, or MLN as it was known as, is no longer applicable to the current specification.
Thanks, Caroline. And where can you find the list of activities that can be assessed? And I think you mentioned the PPAC. What is that? Can you just mention that to me?
Right. So the PPAC, the Practical Performance Activity Criteria, is what is used for the assessment of all our listed activities, which also appear in the specification. I'm not quite sure of the page now, Penny, on the current version. Is it page 22? Anyway, it's in the specification. And that list of activities is the only list that can be taught for GCSE physical education. And the assessment criteria for each of those activities can be found in the Practical Performance Activity Criteria, commonly shortened as the PAC. And this must be used because this describes all of the assessment traits that candidates can be assessed against for each of the activities and for both elements of the assessment criteria. That's skills and isolation and the application of skills. And as I say, we're currently on version 5. And it really is important to use the most up-to-date, got my teeth in wrong. It's also important to use the most up-to-date version of the PAC because there have been some significant changes as well as additions to the activities. There are some slight changes to the activities, such as the skilling of heading in football, which has been removed from the assessment criteria. So heading in football was originally in the criteria. That's now been removed for health and safety guidance.
That's great. Thank you, Caroline. And on this presentation, there is a link to the practical performance assessment criteria and the specification where you can find the list of activities. So just a question that teachers often ask is, if you have a candidate who is selected to be part of the sample, do you have to have video evidence, or could you show it live on the day?
So, Penny, it should be noted that it is the responsibility of the centre to ensure that evidence of both elements of the assessment criteria is available for moderation in all activities that have been assessed. That is the skills in isolation and the application of skills in a competitive situation, with these being shown separately for moderation purposes. Actually, they should also have been assessed separately by the teacher assessors. This includes evidence of activities that have been performed outside of school in outside clubs or in public spaces such as swimming pools. It is recognised that there may be difficulties in collecting evidence from such venues. However, it is an Ofqual regulation that all evidence is available for moderation, and if it is not, then 0 marks may be awarded as there is no rewardable material for evidence. If a centre is unable to provide the evidence of the assessment of a candidate's practical performance, it may be necessary to select an alternative activity to assess and which can be moderated. So we must have evidence of every single activity that has been assessed by the teacher. Evidence must also be available, So evidence must be available of all assessed activities for all candidates. That's what I'm trying to say, whether moderated by a visiting moderator or submitted as video evidence. And it's important to consider that it is the responsibility of the moderator to select the sample of 30 performances on receipt of the completed PE2MS form. Centres cannot refuse to show evidence of any activities that have been assessed, as this is a requirement that has been set by Ofqual. If an individual candidate is unavailable to participate in an activity during a moderation visit due to injury on the day of the moderation, for example, that should not present a problem, as another candidate of a similar standard would be selected for moderation as a replacement, and it will be up to the discretion and the decision making of the moderator who moderates the evidence of that centre.
That's great. Thanks, Caroline. So can you just share with me some top tips when planning for moderation?
Okay, Penny. So for the performance of the candidates in the skills and isolation, it is recommended that centres incorporate differentiation into their practices for the assessment and moderation of the skills in isolation, with those who have been awarded marks in the levels 4 and 5 mark bands performing more of the advanced skills and techniques in a more pressured and contextual situation, and at a greater level of speed and competitiveness. The appropriateness of showing the same 4 skills at the same level for all candidates must be carefully considered if there is a difference in the marks that have been awarded to the candidates, considering the strengths and weaknesses of the candidates and the marks that have been awarded. Skills and isolation should also be aligned with the performer's playing position, such as in netball, where a candidate's position is goal shooter or centre. So try and make the skills as specific as you can to your students, where they're playing in a specific playing position. It's no good doing generic skills if, as I say, in netball, for example, you have a goal shooter and we don't see the student in that playing position shooting at the netball ring. Now, for the performance of the candidates in the application of skills, techniques and decision making under pressure during condition practices and a conditioned formal competitive situation, most centres were able to provide an opportunity for their candidates to perform in a formal competitive situation, which usually refers to a routine in trampolining, dance and gymnastics, for example, a full performance in skiing, rock climbing, cycling and kayaking, and a full competitive game in a team or an individual sport. It is important that centres structure their assessment and moderation sessions to ensure that all elements of the assessment criteria for the application of skills, techniques and decision making in a formal competitive situation are included. And that's why I'm using the full title of that element of the assessment criteria, because it's just not about the physical skills. So the final mark that is awarded should be one that is a best fit mark, including the assessment not only of the candidate's performance of the physical skills, as I've just said, but also of communication skills, where applicable in a team activity, influence on self and others during a performance, decision making during the performance, application of tactics, as well as adherence to and application of the rules and regulations and the health and safety guidance of the activity. Candidates do not benefit from just playing a game in the hope that the evidence from all or most of the assessment traits occurs by default. The addition of small-sided condition games would also aid the transition between the skills and isolation and the competitive situation. So that leads me on to the next point and say that it is also important to consider that there should be a balance between the time that is allocated to the moderation of the skills in isolation and the application of skills in a competitive situation. It does, of course, depend on the activity and the number of candidates who are being moderated, but as a rough guide, it would be appropriate to allocate approximately 25 to 30 minutes for the skills in isolation and roughly 30 to 35 minutes being allocated for the competitive game. with 15 to 20 minutes for each half if playing football, for instance. Now, please don't take that as a rule of thumb. That is just purely guidance. And as I said, it does depend on the number of candidates who are being assessed in the activity. So if you have one candidate who's playing in a team game, it might not be necessary to show that length of footage for skills in isolation and the game. Or it might be more appropriate to take longer. And this will depend not on what the moderator says, it will depend on the teacher assessor and whether they feel as though the evidence that is being seen by the moderator or is being shown for the moderator is sufficient to provide justification of the marks that have been given to that or those candidates.
Thank you.
So the evidence for both should be shown separately. That's another important point. For example, it is not acceptable to agree with a centre's marks if a dance routine is shown as the only piece of evidence, or a candidate performing in just one round of golf will not be sufficient to justify the marks for both the skills in isolation and the application of skills in a competitive situation.
That's really helpful, and I'm sure people will really value that information about preparing for moderation. So what advice would you give teachers who are having a video moderation?
So this is a bit more problematic, as we're finding that remote moderation centres continue to leave it until close to the end of the moderation window before submitting their evidence. Now, this is not ideal, as if there are any problems, for example, with any missing evidence, or centres have difficulty uploading the video material on the Learner Work Transfer portal, this causes unnecessary delays and could be to the detriment of the candidate's marks. Now, it is acknowledged by all of us that filming any activity is challenging, although the importance of providing clear and adequate evidence to justify the marks that have been awarded by the teacher assessors cannot be underestimated, because that's what we base our moderation on. The full list of guidelines and requirements concerning the recording of the practical performances can be found in the specification in Appendix 4, Recording Practical Performances. Furthermore, a document entitled Guidance on Video Recording is also available to download from the Pearson website. DVD evidence should not be submitted as a series of clips, especially from different times. Rather, it should be presented as one piece of continuous footage, although the skills in isolation and the application of skills can be filmed separately and at different times. Now, it's important to make sure that the camera captures the whole performance of a skill. So when filming evidence of the skills in isolation for such activities as badminton, tennis and table tennis, where the shuttle ball lands on the court or on the table, this must be seen on the video evidence. Similarly, in athletics, it is a requirement when filming a competitive situation, such as a running event, to see the start as well as the finish of the race, for example. Centres should check the quality of the DVD that is viewed by or sent to the moderator and ensure that the evidence suitably justifies the marks that have been awarded. This could also be carried out during the internal moderation stage, which is also an important part of the moderation process. And this is particularly important where candidates have taken responsibility for providing their own video evidence in activities such as equestrian, boxing, dance, cycling and golf, for example. So please check that video evidence and make sure that the marks fit the assessment criteria and vice versa. Centres are also responsible for marking all activities using the criteria as they would for any activity that is school-based. And it's advised that centres also take responsibility to make sure that enough evidence is presented and that this is of a good quality and that it has been accurately marked against the activity criteria.
That's brilliant. I'm sure that will be so helpful for all teachers who are either having a live visiting moderation or having a DVD moderation. So thank you ever so much, Caroline. I'm just going to share with you some resources, including the past papers, mark schemes and examiners report. And the examiners reports provides lots of really helpful information on how the exam series went. So offering hints and tips. And I would really strongly recommend that you take time to look at these for each of the 4 components. Every year, as Carolyn has mentioned, we do produce the instructions for the conduct of NEA, a document, okay, which explains the processes and procedures of the moderation process. And again, I would strongly recommend that you look at that because it contains all the information needed for the moderation. There is a new one that will be produced for next year. It'll be produced probably November. There's also guidance on video recording for practical performance, and there are exemplars of different activities, including equestrian, netball and trampolining. In addition, there are some FAQs, and I've also put the link into the ICQ, the initial contact questionnaire, which need to be completed before the moderator contacts you. There's a guide to the PE2MS, which is also the form that needs to be completed. And finally, a link to some past training courses. And then finally, we have got some training events coming up, both for MOCS marking training taking place at the end of October. So please do sign up if you would like to avoid disappointment. And also there is training for the component for the personal exercise programme. And again, please do sign up to avoid any disappointment, as those courses do get full. And finally, I hope that you found this helpful, and you can always book an appointment with me to discuss any queries that you have about the GCSE PE practical or any other component, any other PE and sport qualification. So please, my contact details are there. Don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you found it really helpful. Thank you.